Did you know your credit card points and miles can lose value to inflation? Credit card companies often reduce the redemption value of your points and miles. Now imagine a credit card with rewards that can grow in value. With the Gemini credit card, you can earn Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos instantly with no annual fee. Every swipe at the store or gas pump earns you instant rewards deposited straight to your account. Plus, sign up now for a $200 Bitcoin bonus to kickstart your rewards. Visit Gemini.com/card today. Check out the link in the description for more information on rates and fees. Again, if you're looking to invest in Bitcoin but don't know where to start, the Gemini credit card makes it easy.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Hey, former friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops-Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Brian Rauf. He does such great work over at eCheck CBB. Missed a piece of news yesterday while I was doing my Big East Conference preview, the fact that Paul McMillan, he is a 20-point-per-game scorer from Canisius that transferred on over to Grambling. He has decided that he is going to be stepping away from the program, and he is redshirting this year, so we're going to talk with him a little bit about the landscape of the SWAC. We have seen pretty much 4 coaching changes and 1 near coaching change with Tarleton State, putting Billy Gillespie on leave and then reintroducing him back, so Tarleton State, they're back to normal, but we have seen a lot on the coaching front, so we're going to be talking about that. We'll also be talking about some of these teams towards the middle of the SEC as well, a big-time conference of intrigue. I know that Brian, he is a South Carolina graduate, so we're going to be talking about that conference and so much more, so we do have ourselves some great chatter and some great insights today. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn, and if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have 1 or 2 ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is indeed powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds 100% of the time, that all gambling transactions do get approved every single time. When you go to edgeboost.bet, make sure you utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That's going to get you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat it up with Brian, as he does great work over at Basket Under Review. A little bit of a change there, as he's doing some great work over with Trilly Donovan's website. He's going to be doing a few shows for them. He's always on point with his amazing insights. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at the letter B, his last name Rauf, R-A-U-F, the number 34, all together. And Brian, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Greg. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Brian. And Brian, this has just been a wild last 30 or so days, because I'm sure that you know this as well as I do. With coaching changes, you'll have 1 or 2 that happen, but we've had 4, and then we had the Tarleton State situation where I was thinking for sure that they were going to be moving on from Billy Gillespie. He gets placed on leave, and all of a sudden he's back once again. Just what have you made out of all this coaching news that we've seen over the last 30 days? Because I can't remember a more rambunctious September/early October.
It's very strange. It's very strange. The Bruce Pearl stuff, I think you could read the writing on the wall, because there's already some questions going back to the end of last season if he was going to retire. And you got the sense if that was going to happen, Steven, his son, was going to take over. And so it may be a Tony Bennett type situation from last year. Right. So that was somewhat understandable and expected. But the string of we'll just say coaches who have had their jobs in question for disciplinary reasons since practice started is alarmingly high. That's the part that I think is the interesting aspect to this. Schools are taking it more seriously, but it's also just kind of one of those weird things. We look back and like, wow, do you remember that the fall of 2025 and all those coaching change? Like, that was weird. I think we're just might be in one of those like weird times right now because there's not like a common trend other than we just have coaches seemingly lashing out and doing things that they should not do.
Yeah, we certainly have had a lot of that recently. And out of all the coaching situations, which one do you think might be the one with the most upside? Because I do take a look at that St. Joe's situation, and I feel like in terms of Steve Donahue and what he's going to be able to bring to the table, that they're going to be just fine. Because I felt like Billy Lang honestly underachieved for the longest time over at St. Joe's, and with the Wofford situation, that's bad. Obviously, Cal State Bakersfield, that's probably the worst of the four because, man, when you're getting into trafficking, that's not something that you want to be talking about on a college basketball podcast. And with the Auburn situation, I think that Steve Furl's going to be fine, but out there in the SEC, that's a little bit tough. And I just come back to St. Joe's thinking, hey, this team is still going to be okay.
I think so. Like the talent on the roster is there for them to be, at the very least, a solid team in the A-10. Right. Yes, you have to replace a coach at an inopportune time who went and took an assistant job with the Knicks and Billy Lang, but he wasn't somebody who was a positive for St. Joe's, and I say that in the most respectful way. You mentioned how they've underachieved the last couple of years. They never really met or exceeded expectations under him, despite the talent that they had. He was a good talent accumulator, but he wasn't necessarily great at maximizing. Donahue is somebody who, in the past, has maximized the talent on his roster and has elevated the talent on his roster. He's had some teams where he's done the opposite, got maximized it. He has some track record of showing he can. And so, not to say this is a positive for St. Joe's, but I think it has a chance to be this season could work out better because you have somebody who's been around the program and may have a good sense of how to elevate the players in the town on that roster.
Yep, I'm right there with you. What happens after this year, because the one thing I'll always give Billy Lang is that he was a tremendous recruiter, got great talent in there. That's the question mark. But in terms of the X's and O's this year and this year alone, I do think that this can work out for St. Joe's. And myself, from a betting perspective, that's all that I'm concerned about. As we do have Brian Rauf, he does such tremendous work over at Basket Under Review, the Trilly Donovan website. He is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that it is going to be interesting to see what we get out of Auburn, because that doesn't feel like it's a bad situation either. How much / how little the players knew about the passing of the torch from Bruce Pearl to Stephen Pearl, that's a little bit questionable. But the reason why I'm a little bit more bearish on that situation rather than St. Joe's is not necessarily because of the talent or anything like that. It's just because the SEC is so brutal. And I do want to get your thoughts on this Auburn team, because obviously they made the Final Four last year. They were a top 2 team all throughout the year last year. And I don't think that they're going to like crap out and be like some 500 team or anything like that. I just think that with a changeover from Bruce Pearl to Stephen Pearl, where the margins are so thin in the SEC, this could be a move that costs them a few wins just with not knowing what to do, perhaps, in those late game situations.
I think Auburn has a wide variance of outcomes this season as any, let's say, top 25 team, maybe even any power conference team in the country this season. Because while I'm with you that I don't expect them to bottom out or be a 500 team or anything like that, the last time Auburn, and this was with Bruce Pearl in charge, and this was after the first Final Four trip, the last time they finished or went into the season ranked outside the top 300 in minutes returning or minutes continuity, they finished sub 500 overall on the season. And so like that is not that far back. That's not out of their own possibility, I don't think, for this team. I do not expect it because there's a lot of talent on this roster. So I think more questions than we are at times because of the respect that we have for the Auburn program and the way Bruce Pearl has run it. There's the question of Stephen Pearl. He's been so influential to that program in the last couple of years, with essentially being the de facto defensive coordinator. So from a acumen standpoint, that's not a question. But you go from being, second in command to the lead guy, that's a jump. Todd Pettiford is going from bench gunner, where he was awesome, to really being like a true point guard. We'll see how that goes and if that really works. This roster has 4 guys who played Division I basketball last season. That could be fine because there is talent there. But if they struggle, it's like, they had 4 guys who played Division I basketball last season, and that's it. And maybe there's depth concerns because of that, because they're relying on freshmen, they're relying on JUCO transfers. they're relying on some D2 transfers. There are some questions here with this Auburn team where they're going to be in the top 20 in preseason, and I think they should because of the talent on paper. They could end up being a top 10 team at the end of the season, competing for an SEC title. They could be one that finds itself fighting for an NCAA tournament berth, just because of a lot of the unknowns and some things maybe won't translate as well as we think they will. Auburn's a team I'm very interested to watch this season.
Yep, Auburn is going to be such a fascinating team in an SEC that, as we know, it's got so much depth. And over the last few days, another team has been coming into, shall we say, the news cycle is Kentucky. Because with Kentucky, I don't even know if I want to try to say the guy's name correct, but the international man of mystery, that 6'11", he is now eligible. And that's big because I know that they've had a lot of transfers, and the most questionable part of Kentucky last year was the fact that they had some, shall we say, rebounding issues towards the back half of the season, but they bring in Jaden Quantance, who's coming off of injury from last season, and I want to get your thoughts on this team because they also have Malachi Moreno, a true 7-footer coming in, the guy's name who I was having a tough time with, Andre Jelovich, hopefully I got that correct, he's now eligible as well, and I look at this Kentucky team as one being very much of intrigue in the SEC, and one that I could actually see taking a little bit of a leap under Mark Pope from year number one.
Quaintance is going to be the guy who they need to rely on in February and March if they're going to make the Final Four and reach the goals that Kentucky has. Getting him healthy for that, I think, is priority number one. But he's probably not going to be totally ready to go at the start of the season. And even if he is, you're going to have to ramp him up to where you want him to be, and you don't want to put too much on him too early. So no matter what happens with him, you're going to be relying on other guys for Kentucky for at least the first 2.5 months of the season, right? And now those options just got shorter. I think Brandon Garrison is the most important player, particularly in November for Kentucky for that reason, because the guards are really, really good. They're very deep. You got a lot of perimeter scoring pop there. And it would not be the first time that Mark Pope just forget about the big men. We're going 5 out, just shooting on the threes we want to, which this Kentucky team may very well be and turn into. But if they're going to handle opposing big men on the inside and hold their own in the interior, hold their own rebounding, hold their own protecting the rim, Malachi Moreno's got a lot of talent. Asking him to come as a freshman and carry a bigger load maybe he was expecting is a tall task. Not one that he can't handle, but it's a tall task. Brandon Garrison's the guy who's been around. He's coming back for a second year with the program. Had been at Oklahoma State before that. Highly regarded high school recruit. He is the one who I think has to really step up and be a bit of a stabilizer until Quaintance can come back.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that is going to be so key for them. And I do think that with Kentucky, there's going to be a lot of intrigue and there's going to be a lot of fascination with them. And with the SEC, I do think that there's quite a talented middle this year in this conference. I want to talk about that with Brian on the other side. I also do want to talk a little bit about the SWAC. That Paul McMillan news was relatively big. You lose a 20-point per game score, and I really do think that the SWAC is going to be much, much better this year, providing a lot of bang for your buck in terms of those 20-plus point spreads. We'll be talking about that with Brian on the other end, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast Family Podcast.
Did you know your credit card points and miles can lose value to inflation? Credit card companies often reduce the redemption value of your points and miles. Now, imagine a credit card with rewards that can grow in value. With the Gemini credit card, you can earn Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos instantly with no annual fee. Every swipe at the store or gas pump earns you instant rewards deposited straight to your account. Plus, sign up now for a $200 Bitcoin bonus to kickstart your rewards. Visit Gemini.com/card today. Check out the link in the description for more information on rates and fees. Again, if you're looking to invest in Bitcoin but don't know where to start, the Gemini credit card makes it easy.
And we're back here, lovely Las Vegas, for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be rejoined by this man, as Brian Rauf. He's doing great work over at Basket Under Review, doing some great written work for them. I know that he's going to be doing some weekday/weekend shows for them as well. I know that he is hard at work getting set for what is going to be an amazing college basketball season. Follow him on the old Twitter/X at BRoff33. And Brian, we left off talking a little bit about Kentucky, which no doubt I think that it's going to be a fun year for them, but also I think that this middle of the SEC is going to be of great fascination as well. I look at the SEC and the top teams, and I don't think that there's as much separating them and the middle as a lot of people might think. Like, obviously, Florida's coming in with a lot of talent. They're going to be towards the top of the SEC. Tennessee is Tennessee. You always know what to expect out of them on defense. Arkansas, teams like that. But I think that the difference between a team like Florida, Kentucky, and a team like Vanderbilt, let's throw out there, even a team like in Oklahoma, I think that it's very thin. And I think that for the SEC, it might be a conference that you really have a lot of teams beat up on one another because the depth is really there, in my opinion, with those middle tier teams.
I think so too. I'm not expecting 14 teams make the tournament again.
That's insane.
I'll go out on a limb and say I'm not expecting that. But I would expect double digits to make it from this conference. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility given the talent that is on paper and how some of these rosters look on paper. I don't know if the top of the league is as strong as it was last year, and that doesn't mean there are not really good teams in the league this year. But like, you had 2 Final Four teams, one of which was the national champion. The other one was number 1 in the country for a vast majority of the season. And then that doesn't even mention like Alabama. That doesn't even mention a couple other top teams like Kentucky who had more top 10 wins than anybody else in the country. Last year was a historic year for the SEC for good reason. I think they are still far and away the best league in the country, largely because you mentioned how many good teams are at the top and how many really good teams, maybe even above them. I just don't know if we're going to see like that true disparity between the very best teams in the league and the middle. I think that gap is smaller this year than it was last year, which, to your point, I think should make for a very intriguing SEC title race and should lead to maybe not 14, but probably double-digit teams from the SEC making the tournament.
Yep, and I do think that that's going to be a lot of fun to be taking a look at because there's a lot of teams I think have upside in the SEC. As we do, Brian Rauf, he does great work over at Basket Under Review, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And is there maybe 1 or 2 of those, shall we say, mid-tier teams in the SEC that you're feeling bullish about? Because I just take a look at things and I don't know where they're going to be seated with regards to preseason poll, and I don't make too much of preseason polls personally because a lot of these people get them wrong, but that said, I just look at this Vanderbilt team in year number 2 under Mark Byington with the fact that they do have quite a bit of that talent coming back from last season. They did, in my opinion, a nice job of being able to add some talent in the backcourt as well, and I really do think that this is a Vanderbilt team that when it's all said and done, they're going to be a top 25 team, and I could see them vying for a top 5 spot in the SEC.
I don't think that's out of the question for Vanderbilt. I think Byington has shown himself to be a really, really good coach. Some of this is going to depend on the Frankie Collins gamble and what Frankie Collins you get, because he's somebody who can elevate you. He's somebody who can sink you. A.J. Hoggard kind of held that role last season, so it is kind of fitting that you go from one kind of wild card point guard to another. Another team I'm looking at is Texas A&M. And A&M is intriguing to me partially because you're bringing in Bucky McMillan, you're playing Bucky ball, the kind of up-tempo system we don't see have consistent success at the power conference level. He's tried to fill this roster in a way that fits the system with names that we know, but names that were available for a reason. However, I think they fit the system. Let's take Mackenzie Mbako from Indiana, right? He spent 2 years in Indiana playing in a non-modern offense under Mike Woodson, let's put it that way, where he had to play out of position because, one, he was one of like 2 guys on the team who could shoot, but they also would throw 2 or 3 big men on the court at the time. The second he got into a more wide-open, up-tempo system like the one Bucky McMillan wants to play was in the pre-draft process at the G League elite camp and then the draft combine as well. And he crushed it to the point where people wondered if he was going to come back to college at all. And so if you get that kind of NBA prospect out of Mackenzie Mbako, I think that elevates Texas A&M. Bring in Pop Isaacs as well. He was somebody who was really inefficient at Texas Tech. Again, playing in a more slower, methodical offense. Goes to Creighton. Only plays in 8 games for Creighton, so we don't know how the rest of the season would have gone, but was awesome and really efficient in those 8 games with Creighton. Another guy who may benefit from playing in a more up-tempo system. Rylan Griffin struggled last season at Kansas playing in a slower system. Was awesome in an up-tempo system before that at Alabama. And so you kind of go down the list, and a lot of guys with question marks. And so I think it's fair to have questions about A&M, but I also think it's fair to look at the other side of the coin and say, okay, the best version of all these guys all have a similar trend in the fact that they did their best work in an up-tempo kind of breakneck, run-at-all-costs offense or style, which Buck McMillan wants to play. So I think there's a world where this works for the Aggies and works in a big way to where they're a top 25 team. They're a top 20 team competing, for potentially a Sweet 16 berth.
And I could very much see that being one of those teams that maybe starts a little bit slow because you've got so many moving pieces, you've got a very distinct style, but then really picks up steam towards back half of the season. I don't know if you necessarily agree/disagree with that sentiment and that thought, but I do think that is one of those teams that is very much like that, almost like, for lack of a better term, like the Eric Musselman teams that we saw over at Arkansas a few years ago.
Yeah.
I think that they could be very much cut from the same cloth from them.
Yeah, anytime you have a lot of newcomers, a lot of transfers coming in together, it's going to take time, more often than not, for them to learn the chemistry that you need to play together at a high level, particularly in a league like the SEC, right? And so the only way you get that is to play together. I could very well see that where maybe they lose a game or two where they shouldn't in November, and then come February, they're that team that everybody, is kind of scared popping up on their schedule because they're clicking on all cylinders.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that there's so much upside, and I love the Bucky McMillan style. When you have that many transfers, typically you do see these teams drop a game or two that you might not want to see, but man, I could see that team being one that takes off in the SEC, which we see every year. One team out there in the SEC, aside from Lions here, because nobody lost in the SEC in the non-conference portion other than really South Carolina, where they lose a few games and then they pick up some steam. So that'll be a lot of fun, as Brian Rauf, who does such great work over at Basket Under Review, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And not often that I'm talking about the SWAC during the offseason, but there is a lot of intrigue with this conference. Bethune-Cookman brought in just a whole bunch of guys. You saw a whole bunch of coaching changes as well. And we did see the news on Tuesday that Paul McMillan, who was a 20-point per game scorer over at Canisius, albeit Canisius wasn't great last year, but when you're averaging 20 points per game, you're doing something right. He has decided that he is going to be stepping away from the program. And just how do you view this conference? Because with the SWAC, it's always a conference that is notorious for getting a 16 seed in the NCAA tournament. As a matter of fact, they have, I believe, 23 out of the last 24 years. But I honestly think that this conference is so much better than it was 8 seasons ago. And I do think that there's a lot of intrigue to be had. And from my side of things, in terms of a betting perspective, these teams are going to get like 20 points in these bye games. I think there's going to be a lot of value on them this year.
I think there will after the first week. Because as you mentioned, there's so many changes. There are new additions that are exciting new additions that have elevated the league, both from a roster perspective and a coaching perspective. I want to take a first look at these teams in actual action, see what's real and what's not. The reason a lot of these guys, like you mentioned, the ones Bethune-Cookman took, are available are because there are some question marks surrounding them at previous stops. I want to take a week of kind of evaluate the landscape, get some actual data points on the court that we can look at. But then I agree with you. And I think the conference typically is one that has a lot of intrigue during the conference season because anybody can beat anybody on a given night. Some years, because of how good the teams are this year and how improved they are, as you said, which is going to make that conference tournament come March really, really fun. But yeah, give me a week on those teams to get some data points and we can figure out what's real and what's not. And that would hammer a lot of those really large lines you're going to see for the rest of the non-conference schedule.
That is going to be a fun conference, and it is really nice to see the SWAC just picking up a bunch of talent in general. Will that translate to a bunch of wins? We shall see, but there's a lot of intrigue with that conference, and there's certainly just an upgrade that has been had over the last few years. That's no question, and this podcast, it always upgrades when you're aboard, Brian. I know you're doing great work over at Basket Under Review. I know you've been taking on some new projects over the last few months, so we'll give you the floor here. Let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me on social media at BRauf33. That is everywhere. Twitter, Blue Sky, everywhere you could find me. It's BRauf33, BRAUF33. Basket Under Review, we have all the preseason content you could possibly want up there. Three-Man Weave and Will Warren are doing some awesome conference previews, taking you all the way through the rest of the month, which is great. Me and Matthew Winnick have a new show called Weekend Under Review that's going to air every Monday and Friday, both on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, breaking down on the Monday show, the weekend's games, looking ahead to the week ahead, and then on Friday, breaking down what happened during the week, looking ahead to the weekend's games. We started that on Monday. We're picking it back up on Friday, and throughout this month, we're looking at the exhibition games and kind of the de facto preseason, what we're looking for some teams there. So we have the preseason and the previews very well covered at Basket Under Review, so make sure you check that out.
Absolutely. And Brian, I know that he is hard at work getting set for what is going to be an incredible college basketball season. He's been putting in work all 12 months to be able to get set for this. And every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So big thanks to Brian for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family podcast. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, LRCM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via the 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. 2 conference previews remaining. The Big Ten and the SEC. We'll be doing those in the next few weeks. And then lo and behold, in early November, you're getting picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.